Inside a sealed courtroom in San Francisco, live streamed to 70 million stunned viewers, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett is stripped of her citizenship by Judge Edward Chen, without trial, without defense, without mercy. But 5 minutes later, she flips the tables with a single act of defiance, exposing not just corruption, but the outlines of treason buried deep within the federal bench. This isn't politics. It's betrayal at a national scale. What happens when the man holding the gavel is the one who betrayed the flag? And when treason wears a black robe, what punishment could ever be enough? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. At precisely 3:12 a.m., Jasmine Crockett's phone vibrated on the nightstand with a high-priority alert. The subject line glowed like a warning shot. Mandatory appearance, Federal Ethics Tribunal, 9 a.m. No explanation, no contact, just a location in downtown San Francisco and a seal marked classified. Within seconds, she was sitting upright, adrenaline pounding harder than any alarm. Her legal team hadn't been notified. Her congressional office was dark, and the tribunal, a body she'd never even heard of, created, it seemed, just for this moment. When she arrived hours later at the courthouse, escorted not by aides but by silent marshals, the marble halls felt colder than stone, like something ancient and weaponized. Cameras lined the ceiling corners, blinking red, feeding live to over 70 million viewers worldwide. But inside the chamber, not a single civilian sat. As she stepped through the heavy double doors, Jasmine saw the nameplate before the bench, and her pulse froze. Presiding, Judge Edward Chen, a federal judge with no jurisdiction over ethics violations of elected officials. And yet here he was, robed in authority he wasn't supposed to have. The room was designed like a theater, no jury box, no gallery, only a raised dais and a single seat in the middle, hers. The walls were padded, not for sound, but for control. Her chair didn't even swivel. It locked her in place like a defendant at a war tribunal. Before she could speak, the clerk announced, "All legal representation is restricted. The respondent will address the bench directly, without counsel." Her attorney was escorted out without a word. No motions were allowed, no access to discovery, no documentation had been provided. The judge's first words dropped like a hammer. "This court does not entertain argument. It executes review." Jasmine, still composed on the outside, felt the air constrict around her, not from fear, but from clarity. She had just walked into an ambush in plain sight, and the world was watching. The silence that followed Judge Edward Chen's decree, no counsel, no argument, was suffocating. Not empty, not passive. It pulsed like a pressure chamber, invisible yet visceral. The oxygen in the room seemed to compress, thickening with an unseen weight that pressed against Jasmine's ribs, her throat, her resolve. The cameras above blinked silently, predatory, transmitting every second to tens of millions who had no idea they weren't watching justice unfold. They were watching it collapse. She had faced hostile hearings before, congressional ambushes, talk show smear campaigns. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't theater. It was premeditated annihilation wrapped in legal protocol. Judge Chen didn't clear his throat. He didn't shuffle papers. He simply began, as though reading from scripture, cold, rehearsed, final. "The respondent," he intoned, not using her name, "is hereby found in material breach of the public confidence doctrine, in sustained violation of Ethical Clause 3.1, and in probable collusion with external destabilizing networks." His voice was detached, almost tranquil, a bureaucrat delivering a death sentence with the effect of a weather report. There was no charge sheet, no burden of proof, no inquiry into her intent, context, or character. It was a monologue masquerading as justice, and every word was a scalpel meant to cut her out of the American body politic. Jasmine's hands were still. Her breathing was measured, but not calm. Inside her chest, a quiet war raged between discipline and devastation. Not because she believed the words, but because the system did. She glanced at her counsel, seated helplessly 2 rows behind a security partition, his mouth moving in silent protest no one could hear. He had been stripped of voice, title, and even pen. Not even a legal pad had been allowed to pass the perimeter. Jasmine Crockett, a sitting member of Congress, now sat in federal court without a single constitutional right intact. Chen leaned slightly forward. "This court will not entertain grandstanding," he said, though no one had spoken. "The facts are determined. The record is closed." The phrase struck like a hammer blow. No record had been opened. No facts had been debated. There had been no opportunity to respond, to submit evidence, to even acknowledge the allegations being levied against her. And yet here it was, a verdict dressed in the costume of procedure, made all the more chilling by its speed. The next moment felt like time fraying at the edges. "It is the ruling of this tribunal," Chen declared, his voice tightening ever so slightly, "that Jasmine Crockett is to be stripped of her United States citizenship, effective immediately." No gavel strike, no dramatic pause, just a single sentence spoken with the steadiness of a knife sliding into flesh. A few people in the room inhaled sharply. The stenographer's fingers trembled. Somewhere in the live stream booth, a technician dropped a headset, but Chen kept speaking. "Further," he continued, "the respondent shall be removed from all official posts. All federal access credentials shall be invalidated within 24 hours. All properties, accounts, or assets derived from government associations shall be placed under immediate audit and freeze order." His eyes remained locked forward, not on Jasmine, but through her, as if she were already absent, already erased. Then came the final blow. "The respondent shall be prohibited from entering Washington, D.C., or engaging with any federal office or agency, digital or physical, until such time as the state determines eligibility has been restored under the exceptional review protocol." There was no exceptional review protocol. The phrase was invented, a bureaucratic black hole into which rights disappeared. And still, Jasmine had not spoken a word. She tried, once. Her jaw tightened, her mouth opened, but before the first syllable could form, Chen raised his palm. "This court does not recognize unsolicited verbal commentary," he said, not with anger, but with dismissal. It wasn't even repression, it was erasure. He had removed her voice before it could be heard, just as he had removed her citizenship before it could be defended. The very act of speaking had become a punishable offense. The injustice was so layered, so meticulously constructed, that even the press gallery didn't know how to react. These were veteran journalists, hardened, sharp-eyed, experienced in scandal and spin, but not this. Not the mechanized invalidation of a public servant in real time. The courtroom had no jury because it didn't need one. This wasn't a trial. It was an execution by silence. Jasmine's mind tried to keep pace with what her body could not process. In less than 10 minutes, she had been transformed from an elected representative of over 700,000 Americans to a digital ghost. Her congressional ID card would already be deactivated. Her government email locked. Her phone pinging with automated alerts. "Your access has been revoked. Your session has expired. Your authority is no longer valid." Systems built to protect had turned with the precision of a blade. But it was the language, more than the logistics, that did the deepest damage. Stripped, erased, prohibited, frozen. These were not judicial terms. These were control mechanisms, meant not only to punish, but to make an example. The message wasn't just for her, it was for anyone watching, anyone who ever imagined they could stand tall in the face of power and still survive. Jasmine felt the gaze of the cameras now, millions of them, all staring through lenses like barrels. Her mother would be watching, her colleagues, her former law school professors, children who had once pointed at her poster in classrooms, believing she was what justice looked like. And now? Now she had been rebranded as a cautionary tale. Live. But she still didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. Because even as the system dragged her name through a bloodless coup, she understood something more terrifying than the punishment itself. This had always been waiting. Not a sudden strike, but a long-laid trap. She hadn't been ambushed. She had been tracked. And yet, as Judge Chen turned the page to finalize the order, as the sentence crystallized into digital permanence, something inside Jasmine Crockett didn't break. It sharpened. Because there's one thing that power forgets when it moves too fast to feel the blade in its hand. Silence is not surrender. Sometimes silence is a spark, and she wasn't done burning. And as the last words of her sentence echoed through the courtroom, Jasmine didn't flinch. But something inside her shifted, not from fear or shock. Those had already passed. What surfaced now was a memory, sharp, uninvited, a wind through a broken window, one she hadn't spoken of in years. But it had shaped everything. It was summer 2002. Jasmine had just turned 17. Her best friend Danielle, 18, was walking home from her shift at a mobile station in Fort Worth. They spoke around midnight. Danielle said she was tired. Jasmine told her to call once she got home. That call never came. By morning, she was worried. By noon, she was frantic. No one had seen Danielle. Her phone was off. The gas station confirmed she left work as usual. Jasmine and Danielle's mom called every hospital, every police station. Nothing. The next day, ICE called back. Danielle had been picked up near a 7-Eleven. They said she matched a suspect in an immigration case. A woman from Colombia with the same name. No ID, no fingerprint match, no photo, just a name. Danielle, born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, was now being held as a possible undocumented immigrant. Jasmine remembered standing in her room, frozen. She thought, this has to be a mistake. It'll be fixed when they see her birth certificate, when they hear us out. But that's not what happened. Jasmine rushed to the ICE center with Danielle's documents in hand. Birth certificate, school ID, yearbook photo. She was stopped at the gate. A guard behind bulletproof glass said, "You're not listed as immediate family. You're not her attorney. You can't speak to her." Jasmine tried to slide the papers through the slot. The guard didn't even glance, just shut the window and turned away. She stood there knocking, crying, nothing. Danielle was inside, isolated. No phone call, no explanation. For the first 24 hours, she didn't know why she'd been detained. She was questioned repeatedly, fingerprinted, called by the wrong name. When Jasmine finally saw her, Danielle said, voice shaking, "I thought they were going to send me somewhere I've never even seen. I thought I was gone." She was fed cold food, slept with the lights on. No one believed her. No one listened. Jasmine spent 3 days running from newsroom to law office to state reps' offices, begging someone to act. One reporter finally agreed to cover the story. One staffer made a call. That was enough. Danielle was released on the 3rd day. No apology, no explanation, just a sealed envelope with her belongings and a warning to always carry her paperwork. When Jasmine picked her up, Danielle didn't speak. She just sat in the car, shaking, staring at her hands, then whispered, "I don't feel real anymore." That sentence never left Jasmine. It stayed through college, law school, her first public defender job, her campaigns, and now it was back, here in a courtroom where a federal judge had tried to erase her without hearing a word. Because that was when Jasmine learned what no civics class ever taught. Citizenship in America isn't always a guarantee. Not if someone powerful decides to question it. Danielle had been born here, paid taxes, lived her life by the rules, and still a clerical error nearly stripped her of everything. That was the moment Jasmine made herself a promise, quiet, unshakable. Citizenship isn't a gift from the powerful. It's a birthright, and no one takes it without a fight. It became her compass, her cause, why she became a lawyer, why she took impossible cases, why she stood even when the room was stacked against her, because she knew what it felt like to be told you didn't belong. And now here she was, a sitting congresswoman, being told she no longer counted, that her rights could be deleted by decree. But she wasn't 17 anymore. She wasn't at a window, begging to be heard. Now the cameras were on, the world was watching, and Jasmine Crockett wasn't going to let anyone, not even a federal judge, pretend she didn't exist. Not again, not ever. She hadn't said a single word during the entire sentencing, not one objection, not one plea, not even a breath wasted on outrage. She had sat still as her name, her status, and her citizenship were dismantled by a man in a black robe with absolute control and no accountability. But now, as Judge Edward Chen reached for the closing file, prepared to slam the door on her rights and write her into history as a cautionary tale, Jasmine Crockett finally stood. The room didn't expect it. The cameras didn't predict it. But something in the stillness cracked open as she rose, slow and unwavering. The metal legs of her chair scraped against the polished courtroom floor, with a sound so sharp it cut the air like a blade. Chen didn't even look at her at first. He was shuffling his papers, signaling to the clerk, ready to end the spectacle he thought he'd choreographed to perfection. He believed it was over. That's when her voice entered the room. Calm, clear, controlled. I'm not here to defend myself. I just need 120 seconds. Not for mercy, but for verification. The room froze. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it, with the authority of someone who had lost everything but still held one last truth in her hands. No stammer, no apology, just a precise statement carved out of steel. The bailiff shifted uneasily. The clerk paused mid-gesture. Even the low hum of equipment seemed to fade. For the first time that morning, Jasmine Crockett had seized the rhythm of the room, and the room knew it. Judge Chen glanced up, eyebrows raised not in surprise but in irritation. To him, this was noise, static, a bump in the script. He leaned back, let out a small sigh, and gave a tight, performative shrug. 2 minutes, he said, dismissive as a man granting a child permission to speak before being grounded. Then we move on. He thought he was being magnanimous. He didn't know he'd just opened the door to the beginning of his own undoing. The cameras, all 16 of them wired into every corner of the chamber, turned in unison toward Jasmine. Not because someone ordered them to, because the room itself had shifted. There was no legal precedent for what she was doing, but there was a hunger in the public watching from home, a hunger for something real, something unscripted, something that felt like it mattered. They didn't yet know what she was about to say, but they knew this wasn't part of the plan. And in politics, when something breaks the script, that's when truth has a chance to break through. Jasmine didn't move quickly. She didn't raise her voice. She simply reached forward, with the steadiness of someone who had prepared for this exact second. From beneath the single document folder allowed on her desk, she pulled out a plain, unmarked envelope. Her hands didn't shake. Her posture didn't bend. She didn't look around the room for support. She looked directly at Edward Chen, their eyes locked. For the first time since the proceedings began, she wasn't the one on trial. He was. And in that moment, with a nation holding its breath, with power seated just 30 feet across from her, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just reclaiming her voice. She was aiming it. As Judge Chen reclined, believing the next 2 minutes would pass like static on a forgotten channel, Jasmine turned to the nation, not to explain, not to beg, but to begin the autopsy of his authority. The courtroom lights seemed brighter now. The red, live indicators on the cameras blazed like sirens. She stepped forward, not toward the judge, but toward the lens, toward the 70 million watching from living rooms, classrooms, subway cars, anyone who had been told to believe in the purity of power. She unfolded the first page from the folder in her hand, not hurried, not showy. Every movement was precise, as if she'd rehearsed it in her mind 100 times, waiting for the moment power overplayed its hand. She held it with both hands, not for drama, for clarity. This, she said calmly, is an email sent directly from Judge Edward Chen to a law firm based in Shanghai, Zhongren Legal Group, dated just over a month ago. The courtroom stilled. The message reads, "Please confirm that the payment structure remains untraceable through U.S. financial reporting. I trust your firm will coordinate the timing accordingly. Full confidentiality is expected until the ruling is made public." She paused, locking eyes with Chen. "That's your name at the bottom, Judge. E. Chen. Directly from your court-linked email." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. The weight of them landed like a hammer. Not on the bench, but on the public trust. She calmly placed that sheet down and picked up the next. "This is a bank transfer record," she said, "issued by HSBC Hong Kong. It shows a direct wire transfer of 1.2 million US dollars to an account under Judge Chen's name." Her voice remained steady. The transaction occurred at 10:04 a.m. Hong Kong time, the day before Judge Chen's controversial ruling in the TikTok data privacy case. She let the timeline land fully. One day before he blocked U.S. agencies from placing new restrictions on a foreign-owned app under national investigation. One day before he used the full weight of federal power to side with overseas interest, without transparency, without oversight. You could feel it now, the entire courtroom breathing differently. Not just tension, but realization. For the first time, there was something heavier in the air than accusation. Proof. She moved to the final piece. Some people might think the timing is a coincidence. So let's go one level deeper. Jasmine pulled out a Post-it note, small, worn, but explosive in its simplicity. This, she said, holding it gently, was written by Judge Chen's own assistant. Verified handwriting. Date stamped. It reads, and I quote, "Cancel Friday schedule. Don't risk overlapping with the ruling. Might raise questions if I'm seen." There was no theatrical pause, no shouting. She didn't need to scream to shatter the room. She just placed the note down in front of her and looked up. Calm, firm, ready. This wasn't bad judgment. It was a cover-up, she said, and this court was used to carry it out. Judge Chen sat frozen, not out of surprise, but because there was nothing left to say. In that moment, the man who had tried to silence her with legal technicalities now found himself surrounded by facts so clear, so carefully laid out, they needed no interpretation. And Jasmine Crockett, once the target, was now the only person in the room with control. But Jasmine wasn't finished, because what came next wasn't just corruption. It was something far more dangerous, a betrayal tied not to greed, but to a foreign flag. She gave another subtle nod toward the technician. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the main monitor came alive. A wide, high-definition screen facing the gallery and flanked by federal seals. Across millions of screens at home, the live stream flickered, sharpened, and then locked in. Full-screen display of classified financial data. The camera panned in as Jasmine stepped to the side, allowing the evidence to take center stage. One by one, the files began rotating. Crisp images of bank transfers bearing Chen's name, official letterhead emails from Zhongren Legal Group, and metadata reports mapping IP access logs between Beijing, San Francisco, and Hong Kong. Jasmine didn't rush. She pointed to a highlighted portion of a wire confirmation. "This one," she said, "shows a transfer of 1.2 million US dollars from a flagged Chinese trust account into a private fund controlled by Judge Chen, dated one day before his ruling to protect TikTok from federal regulatory action." She paused, allowing the date to burn itself into the public's memory. But the money is only the surface. The next slide appeared, an enlarged email with the sender and recipient clearly visible, from Edward Chen's official court address, sent directly to a senior partner at Zhongren Legal in China. The subject line read simply, "Final coordination regarding the Crockett ruling." Jasmine's voice was firm but low, as if even she understood the gravity of the sentence she was about to read aloud to an entire country. "Once the ruling against Crockett is finalized, I expect the investment to be secured in digital asset format, as outlined in our Hong Kong DC transfer agreement. Please ensure blockchain conversion is complete prior to public disclosure." She stopped reading. Her eyes scanned the room. "This isn't hearsay. This is a federal judge using his courtroom, and my name, as leverage for offshore crypto payments from a foreign law firm." The effect was instantaneous. A stunned silence took over the chamber. Reporters instinctively reached for their phones. Some didn't even type. They just stared at the screen, jaws clenched. Across the country, the message was hitting harder than anyone expected. This wasn't about campaign donations or subtle favors. This was a federal judge admitting, in writing, that his ruling was tied to a pre-negotiated payout, secured in cryptocurrency, with an entity connected to a foreign government. Jasmine walked toward the monitor and pointed to the final line of the email. Now zoomed in. "Confirm that all records will be deleted from shared servers after transfer is executed." She turned back to the courtroom and said it clearly. "That is destruction of evidence. That is financial laundering. That is conspiracy. And that is treason." The word hung in the air like a suspended blade. No one in the chamber moved. Even Judge Chen had stopped fidgeting. He leaned slightly back, but the color in his face had drained. He wasn't writing anymore. He wasn't speaking. He was simply absorbing, in silence, the unraveling of a secret he had thought was buried in firewalled folders and encrypted ledgers. And Jasmine? She stood tall. No rage, no arrogance, just the steady composure of a woman who had spent her career being underestimated and now had the whole nation's undivided attention. Because in a country where justice is supposed to be blind, she had just proven it was for sale and named the buyer. Just when the courtroom thought the storm had passed, Jasmine stepped forward again, not with documents this time, but with a witness whose silence had nearly cost him his life and whose truth was about to tear the entire foundation apart. She turned slightly, her posture firm but respectful, and said into the microphone, "Your Honor, under congressional protection, I call forward a witness the nation has never heard from, but should have years ago." The rear doors creaked open with slow ceremony. Every neck in the chamber twisted as a single figure stepped through. Tall, well-dressed, precise in movement. His face was calm, but there was something behind his eyes, the kind of weight that only comes from having held the truth too long. Gasps fluttered through the courtroom as the cameras focused. On screen, the chyron read, "Live, Kenji Aomura, former senior financial officer, U.S. Federal Court, California District." Until that moment, his name had never appeared in a headline. And yet, from the tension in the air, you would have thought the man walking to the witness stand was a nuclear scientist defecting in real time. He approached the table with quiet gravity, placed a small metal briefcase on the surface, and took the oath with a voice barely above a whisper. Then he adjusted the microphone. "My name is Kenji Aomura. I served as Senior Financial Compliance Officer at the California District of the Federal Court System for 13 years. I had access to all interagency transactions, security clearance on encrypted server routing, and direct oversight over court-managed transfer protocols. And I am here because I refused to destroy evidence I was ordered to delete." A silence dropped so suddenly that even the buzz from fluorescent lights seemed to fade. "I was instructed," Aomura said carefully, "to remove all traces of an international wire transfer log that involved a foreign trust account, routed through the Hong Kong branch of HSBC. His voice did not waver. The name attached to the transfer was Judge Edward Chen. He reached down, clicked open the briefcase, and pulled out a matte black USB drive in a sealed, tamper-proof bag. "I kept this," he said, holding it high enough for every camera to catch it. "Not for leverage, not for protection, but because I couldn't sleep knowing I had watched the Constitution bend to foreign cash," and said nothing. The courtroom froze in place, stunned not just by the content, but by the clarity, the simplicity of it. There were no legal loopholes to interpret, no complex theories, just a man, standing under oath, stating plainly that he had been told to erase a crime and chose not to. Jasmine stood silently beside him, letting every word carry its full weight. She didn't interrupt. She didn't elaborate. She let him speak, because the truth didn't need narration anymore. "I received the directive at 2:17 a.m. via a secure admin relay from within the judiciary's own encrypted comms platform," Aomura continued. "The file came with a note. Remove all associated metadata from the Crockett case index. Transfer logs from March 27th to March 29th are to be deleted permanently. This is an internal security action. Do not escalate." He pulled out a printed copy of the deletion request. "This is it. I kept it. It's been forensically verified." The judge's face remained frozen, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the bench. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop. No one moved. Then came the part that no one expected, the personal cost. "I was given 48 hours to comply. When I refused, I was reassigned without cause. 2 weeks later, my home was broken into. Nothing stolen. Only my encrypted work drives were taken." Aomura inhaled deeply, then added, "My wife begged me to walk away. My friends told me to move overseas, but I stayed. I stayed because this wasn't about one ruling. This was about whether the justice system still belongs to the people or whether it's already been bought." He set the flash drive down like it was a loaded weapon. Every transaction is time-stamped. Every command to erase them is recorded. You'll see the dates match exactly with the evidence Congresswoman Crockett just presented. Jasmine finally stepped forward again. This witness risked everything, his family, his career, his safety, to hold on to the last digital copy of the truth. She said, if not for him, these files would have been wiped from every system in the country. He didn't do this for me. He did it for all of us. And in that moment, with one man's testimony, one flash drive, and one silent courtroom, a wall of lies began to collapse in front of a watching nation. But before the room could even exhale, a new voice shattered the tension. Not from the bench, not from Jasmine, but from the back row, calm, commanding, and carrying the full weight of federal law. The sudden break in silence was almost surreal, like a spotlight cutting across a theater at the exact moment the audience thinks the show has ended. The voice was measured, clear, unmistakable. Special Agent Daniel Kerrigan, FBI. The man who stood was tall, dressed in a crisp gray suit, his badge briefly visible beneath his coat. But it wasn't the badge that froze the room. It was the sentence that followed. Under the Homeland Security Integrity Protection Act, Judge Edward Chen is hereby taken into federal custody. He is under active investigation for conspiracy to commit treason and accepting illicit financial transfers from a foreign government. The words hit the courtroom like a brick through stained glass. There was no dramatic music, no gas from a movie soundtrack, just the collective breath of an entire nation being sucked out of the room. Reporters blinked in disbelief. Jasmine didn't flinch, but the judge, the man who had moments earlier declared someone else's citizenship void, sat frozen. Color drained from his face like ink washing off paper. His mouth opened for a moment as if searching for a sentence, a phrase, any kind of denial to hang on to, but none came. His lips moved slightly, as if caught between disbelief and collapse, but the muscles of authority had abandoned him. Two agents in black suits emerged from opposite ends of the chamber. They moved in sync, not with urgency, but with quiet certainty, the kind that only comes from executing an arrest that had been planned long before this day. Every camera in the room shifted toward the bench. The red recording lights glowed brighter, and somewhere on the national broadcast feed, the words "Breaking Federal Judge Chen Arrested Live" began flashing on screens from New York to Nebraska. One of the agents approached from the left and carefully rested a hand on Chen's shoulder. Not forcefully, but firmly enough to signal that his time was over. The other agent unzipped a compact black case and pulled out a pair of federal-issued handcuffs. The metal glinted under the courtroom lights, polished and unforgiving. For a moment, it seemed even gravity paused to watch what happened next. Judge Edward Chen, Agent Kerrigan continued, voice even, almost clinical. You are being detained as part of an ongoing counterintelligence investigation concerning unauthorized financial relationships with international entities. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to legal counsel. If you choose to speak, your statements may be used against you. Chen didn't resist. He didn't protest. He didn't even blink. His shoulders slumped by half an inch, just enough to be noticed. As the agents gently guided him to stand, he swayed slightly, the motion betraying the collapse of everything he had built. Not over years, but over decades. The courtroom watched in dead silence as one agent pulled his arms behind his back and applied the cuffs. One click, then another, the steel locking into place like punctuation on a fallen empire. His black judicial robe shifted, bunched awkwardly behind his arms, no longer a symbol of prestige, but now just fabric, hanging loose on a man no longer in control of anything. The camera captured everything. No commercial break, no off-screen moment, just raw, relentless reality. Edward Chen was no longer a judge, no longer a shielded figure of authority. He was now a detainee. As the agents led him away from the bench, they didn't use the private exit behind the podium, the hidden door meant for judges and staff. They walked him straight down the center aisle, the same path used for criminal defendants, framed by the public and the press. Each step echoed off the marble floor with surgical precision, the click of leather soles and polished metal joining in rhythm. It wasn't loud, but it was final. Chen's head tilted downward. His eyes didn't scan the room. He didn't look at Jasmine. He didn't look at the audience. He didn't even look at the cameras. Maybe because he knew it was no longer his courtroom. Maybe because he knew that no amount of silence, no carefully rehearsed statement, no procedural loophole could stop what was coming next. And for the first time in hours, maybe in years, the room felt just a little bit heavier, not from chaos, not from shock, but from the weight of accountability finally landing where it belonged. In the back of the chamber, one reporter whispered to another without looking away, "This isn't a hearing anymore. This is history." And it was, because while Judge Edward Chen was marched out in handcuffs, past the crowd, past the press, past the very walls that once protected him, the world wasn't just watching a man fall, it was watching the system crack open. But Jasmine Crockett didn't just come to survive the fire. She came to build something new from the ashes. And before the walls of the courtroom even cooled, she was already preparing the next blow, not out of revenge, but for redemption, for the system, for the people it nearly crushed. The morning after Edward Chen's arrest, the nation was still reeling. Headlines screamed across every major network. "Federal judge arrested for treason. Live." Cable panels burned through the night with speculation, legal analysis, and disbelief. But while others were still reacting, Jasmine was already moving. At 8:46 a.m., she stepped into the Capitol, wearing the same black blazer from the hearing, but now with a folder in her hand. Not a manila envelope of evidence. This time it was legislation, real, raw, and personal. Staffers paused as she passed. Some nodded. Some avoided eye contact. Everyone knew what this was. Jasmine Crockett wasn't coming to make a speech. She was about to rewrite federal oversight. By 9:03 a.m., standing before the full Judiciary Committee, she formally introduced it. Her voice was calm, her posture unshaken. The microphones hissed for a beat, and then she began. "The Sovereignty and Justice Act of 2025 is not a symbolic gesture. It is the logical consequence of unchecked power. This is not vengeance. This is a structural correction, long overdue." The room listened, not because it was polite, but because the country was watching. Section 1 of the bill struck with surgical precision. All federal judges must disclose all foreign financial relationships, including offshore assets, international holdings, and consulting income. These disclosures must be made annually under penalty of perjury and reviewed by a neutral auditing body, not internal ethics boards. She cited Chen's concealed $1.2 million transfer, the TikTok-related ruling, the secret coordination emails. When judges have secret deals with foreign financial entities, we no longer have a court. We have a compromised theater of justice. Her words didn't just land. They echoed. Section 2 turned the system on itself. Establish a new independent judicial oversight council composed of former judges, legal scholars, forensic accountants, and 3 rotating citizen jurors, nominated by the public, not politicians. The council's authority would extend to surprise audits, emergency recusals, and subpoena power, outside executive or legislative interference. A senator tried to interject. Jasmine didn't flinch. "If the referees of democracy can't be challenged," she said, "then the game was never fair to begin with." That quote would lead the evening news. Section 3 was the dagger. Ban any federal judge from presiding over cases where they, or their immediate family, stand to benefit financially, directly or indirectly. Any violation would result in immediate suspension pending investigation. She paused before reading that part, then spoke slowly. "I stood in a courtroom and watched a man erase my rights while secretly enriching himself. That is not jurisprudence. That is institutional betrayal in black robes." By the end of her presentation, the room had shifted, not just politically, spiritually. Some senators stared down at their desks. Others tapped pens nervously. A few wiped their glasses. Within minutes, news outlets reported that 37 lawmakers, Democrats and Republicans, had requested copies of the bill. By hour 6, it had 52 co-sponsors. By hour 12, it had unanimous committee approval. By hour 24, it was scheduled for an emergency vote, and by hour 48, it passed. The final count, 92-8 in the Senate, 412-23 in the House. When the vote was announced, reporters stormed the corridor. Flashbulbs burst, microphones extended from every direction. Congresswoman Crockett, what do you say to critics who say this bill was rushed? She looked straight into the camera. No smile, no hesitation. Corruption doesn't need more time. It needs consequences, and it needs them now. She turned and walked away. The next morning, President Jacobson signed it into law. No ceremony, no delay. The pen hit paper at 7:32 a.m. The act took immediate effect. The Sovereignty and Justice Act of 2025 became the fastest passed federal ethics bill since Watergate. But more than a legislative win, it became a symbol. Law schools rewrote curriculum overnight. Judges filed emergency disclosures across the country. And on social media, the hashtag "No One Above the Robe" trended for 4 straight days. For Jasmine Crockett, though, it wasn't a celebration. It was a checkpoint. Later that night, she sat alone in her office. The lights were dimmed. Her blazer hung on the back of her chair. On her desk, beside the official copy of the bill, sat an old photograph, faded and bent. It was her and Danielle, 17 and laughing, long before the system showed its teeth. She ran a hand over the edge of the frame. Then, almost in a whisper, she said to herself, "One down." Because for her, this wasn't the end of a fight. It was just the first real punch that landed. And the system finally was starting to feel it. But Jasmine knew that real change didn't end when the ink dried on a bill. It began when the public believed in it. And if there was ever a moment to speak directly to the nation, not as a politician, not as a survivor, but as a citizen, it was now. The press conference was held on the Capitol steps at noon the following day. The air buzzed with heat and history. Camera cranes hung over the crowd like watchful eyes. Reporters packed every inch of the plaza. People gathered behind the barricades, spilling into sidewalks, standing on benches, climbing trees just to glimpse what they knew was no longer just a political moment. It was a reckoning. Jasmine Crockett stepped out from the west entrance, flanked by 2 aides and the staffers who had worked through the night drafting the language of the Sovereignty and Justice Act. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. Her face was composed, focused, like a soldier walking onto sacred ground. Her black jacket fluttered slightly in the breeze. The podium had already been set. The microphones blinked with red lights. Every major network was live. She placed her hands on the wood, paused, and looked out. Not just at the crowd, but into the lens of every camera. Her voice, when it came, was calm but carved from stone. "I stand before you today not as a headline, not as a case study, and not as a warning. I stand here as proof. That truth, when spoken without apology, still has the power to crack even the highest walls." Flashbulbs popped like gunfire, but Jasmine didn't flinch. "I was stripped of my rights by a man in a robe who thought silence would protect him. I was sentenced without trial, labeled a traitor without evidence, erased with the stroke of a gavel. But I'm still standing." The crowd stirred. Some gasped, some clapped, but most just listened. Still, breath held. This country was founded by rebels, not saints. People who stood up when they were told to sit down, who refused to obey injustice dressed in ceremony. So don't tell me citizenship is something that can be taken away behind closed doors by a man who forgot the Constitution the moment he put on a robe. Her hands tightened on the podium. Citizenship isn't paperwork. It's not a badge. It's not a luxury you earn if you behave. It's the birthright of everyone who builds this country, defends it, and holds it accountable. And it cannot be revoked by corruption disguised as law. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. A man near the back whispered, "Say that again." But Jasmine kept going. "I watched a courtroom turn into a stage. I watched a federal judge sell justice to a foreign bank. And I watched how easy it is to destroy someone when the system lets the powerful operate without fear." Now she leaned forward. This was the moment. "But we fixed that. We passed a bill. We dragged a lie into the light. And if you think that was the end of this fight, let me be clear. It was only the first round." The crowd was on edge, not in panic, but in hunger, in readiness. And then, without a script, without checking notes, she said the words that would be carved into walls, stitched onto protest banners, and quoted in courtrooms for years to come. Citizenship cannot be stripped by a robe. It is born from struggle and from truth. There was a beat of silence. Then the crowd erupted. Chants started immediately. "No one above the robe! We are the people! Crockett! Crockett!" The sound rose like a wave, a storm made of voices, shaking the Capitol dome itself. But Jasmine didn't raise her arms in triumph. She didn't smile. She simply stepped back from the podium and looked to the sky, as if she were searching for the echo of every voice that had ever been silenced in a courtroom. Reporters chased her as she walked off the steps. Microphones swarmed. "Congresswoman Crockett, do you think this will lead to more investigations? Are there other judges compromised? What's your next move?" She stopped only once, turned to face a young journalist, barely older than Danielle had been all those years ago, who asked the one question that truly mattered. "Do you still believe in the system?" Jasmine paused. Her answer didn't come quickly. "I believe in the people who refuse to let the system forget who it serves." Then she turned and kept walking. By sunset, her quote was everywhere. CNN ran it on loop with the headline, "The 21st Century Gettysburg Address?" MSNBC aired an hour-long special called "Born from Struggle: The Rise of Jasmine Crockett." Fox News tried to spin it, but even their anchors admitted the speech had struck a chord no smear could erase. The next morning, students marched in 5 cities holding signs that read, "Truth wears no robe." Law professors debated whether Crockett's reforms could signal a shift toward third-party judicial accountability. Civil rights groups launched initiatives named after her. Public defenders across the country wore pins with her quote engraved. But the biggest impact came where it mattered most, in courtrooms. Judges began recusing themselves voluntarily from cases with financial overlap. State legislatures drafted local versions of the Sovereignty and Justice Act. And a coalition of lawyers filed the largest class action suit in federal history, demanding post-conviction reviews of thousands of cases tied to previously undisclosed judicial conflicts. Change had begun, and it began not with a bill, not with a scandal, but with one sentence. Citizenship cannot be stripped by a robe. It is born from struggle and from truth. But sometimes a sentence doesn't just end a speech, it starts a movement. And as Jasmine Crockett walked off those Capitol steps, her words didn't fade into the noise. They ignited something, something bigger than legislation, something you can't unsee, unhear, or undo. The streets were the first to answer. Within 24 hours of the press conference, rallies broke out in cities across the country. It began with a few hundred in Washington Square Park. Students, veterans, union workers, even federal employees off duty. They held handwritten signs. "Citizenship is not conditional. We are not yours to silence." And most strikingly, "Truth greater than robes." By sundown, they were thousands strong, spilling into streets, shutting down traffic, marching not in anger, but in mourning. By the weekend, the numbers swelled into the tens of thousands. From Boston to Phoenix, San Diego to Chicago, people gathered outside courthouses and Capitol buildings. They chanted Jasmine's words like scripture. Speakers climbed steps with bullhorns. Giant LED screens played the moment Chen was cuffed and led away. The image of a federal judge, once untouchable, now accountable, became the viral symbol of a new era. It wasn't just about Jasmine anymore. It was about every case that had ever felt rigged. Every name misspelled. Every voice ignored. This wasn't just protest. This was national recalibration. News helicopters hovered. Drones buzzed over crowds. In Los Angeles, the crowd outside the federal building reached 40,000. Completely peaceful, yet completely unignorable. One by one, district attorneys released statements affirming their commitment to reviewing past rulings for potential bias or conflict. Judges across the country began proactively disclosing financial ties. Some even recused themselves voluntarily from cases they had been expected to oversee for months. The legal system, long known for moving slowly, had just been shoved into motion by public will. And then the classrooms answered. At Georgetown Law, Professor Rachel Mead tore up her entire syllabus. On Monday morning, her students walked into a lecture hall with one phrase projected onto the wall: V. Crockett, 2025. No one asked what it meant. Everyone already knew. By that afternoon, Harvard, Yale, NYU, UC Berkeley, and Howard University had all announced an emergency integration of the Crockett versus Chen case into their constitutional ethics courses. It wasn't just law students studying it. Schools of journalism, public policy, and even digital forensics added modules dissecting how corruption moved through legal systems undetected and how it finally collapsed. At Columbia, a packed auditorium watched the entire 2-hour hearing replayed on the big screen. Jasmine's silent resistance, her 122nd request. The moment Chen's face froze when the email was read aloud. Students didn't take notes. They held their breath. Because this wasn't history, it was a live reckoning. Soon, law professors began publishing peer-reviewed papers analyzing the Sovereignty and Justice Act clause by clause. Legal podcasts exploded in popularity overnight, explaining the finer points of judicial recusal, foreign influence monitoring, and ethics reform. Hashtags turned into movements. Movements turned into seminars. And somewhere in the middle of it all, one reality took root across academia. This wasn't a one-off scandal. This was a case study in civic resilience. The American Bar Association released an unprecedented statement, not just praising the reform, but acknowledging institutional failure. We must admit, it read, that the integrity of the judiciary has been compromised by a lack of transparency and public accountability. The Crockett-Chen incident reminds us that silence is complicity. Within weeks, the ABA announced new continuing education requirements for sitting judges, focused entirely on ethical review and international compliance. And while the streets marched and the schools taught, Congress acted. 6 weeks after the initial hearing, the Sovereignty and Justice Act of 2025 was placed on the president's desk for signing. The legislative path had been nothing short of revolutionary. Hearings were expedited. Amendments were limited. Lobbyists tried and failed to slow it down. The public outcry had become too loud. The media coverage too relentless. Lawmakers who had once scoffed at ethics bills now rushed to co-sponsor. Because votes weren't just being counted, they were being watched. At 9:17 a.m. on a bright April morning, President Jacobson stepped into the East Room of the White House. This time, the signing was not done in private. It was televised, no curtains drawn, no photo ops for select media. Instead, it was streamed to classrooms, played in real time on courthouse monitors, and shown on jumbotrons in public squares nationwide. Jasmine stood behind him, flanked by veterans, teachers, a public defender from Detroit, a high school senior from Tulsa, and a retired judge who had openly supported the bill. The pen touched the paper, and in that moment, America didn't just get a new law, it got a new standard. The Sovereignty and Justice Act of 2025 became the fastest passed ethics legislation in modern U.S. history. But more than that, it became a cultural firewall, a line that future generations would look back on and say, that's where it changed. Even late-night hosts, who usually joke through the headlines, spoke with unusual gravity. One monologue opened not with a punchline, but a quote. "Citizenship isn't something the powerful give us. It's a right we're born with, and no one gets to take it without a fight." The crowd didn't laugh. They applauded. Across the country, murals began appearing. In Atlanta, a 20-foot painting of Jasmine Crockett standing against a collapsing column of gavels. In Detroit, a depiction of a courtroom mid-explosion with scrolls of legislation flying from the rubble. In Oakland, a softer portrait, Jasmine placing a hand over Danielle's shoulder, both of them staring at the Capitol as it shimmered in the distance. Within the federal court system itself, something even more extraordinary happened. A dozen judges resigned, not from scandal, but from shame. Some issued letters to their districts citing a misalignment of values with modern judicial expectations. Others stepped down quietly, avoiding further scrutiny. Meanwhile, a new generation of nominees, vetted under transparency protocols introduced by the Act, stepped into the light. People who had spent their careers in public defense, civil rights, and grassroots organizing. The bench was changing, and America saw it. And somewhere in Fort Worth, a woman named Danielle watched it all from her living room. She wasn't in the spotlight. She didn't speak to the press. But she kept one photo framed on her shelf, two teenagers laughing on a rooftop. Below it, she had taped a handwritten line. "We're still here." Because in the end, that's what the Crockett versus Chen case became. Not a scandal, not a hearing, not even a legislative victory. It became a symbol that even in a nation bruised by its own systems, one voice told at the right time, in the right place, with truth too sharp to ignore, can change everything. But for all the legislation passed, marches walked, and cameras that rolled, the deepest lesson wasn't one that could be written into law. It was something quieter, heavier, a truth that haunted Jasmine Crockett long after the microphones turned off and the streets grew silent. Justice, it turned out, wasn't about punishment, not entirely. It wasn't about how many years a man like Edward Chen would face, or how loud the headlines could scream his downfall. Those were outcomes, repercussions, necessary, yes, but not the soul of what mattered. Because at its core, justice was about recognition, about the invisible finally being seen, the unheard finally being believed. And for Jasmine Crockett, the most painful part of her journey wasn't when she was stripped of her rights. It was how easy it was for those in power to do it, and how long it might have taken to undo if she hadn't fought back. What she came to understand, what America was beginning to understand, was that injustice doesn't always wear the face of a villain. Sometimes it speaks in the voice of protocol. It hides behind marble columns, it wears a robe, and it smiles while it erases you. The real danger was never the blunt force of tyranny. It was the quiet normalization of erasure. Jasmine remembered that icy center again. Not the guard, not even the denial, but the look on Danielle's face when she whispered, "I don't feel real anymore." That line was no longer just a memory. It had become a warning label for every institution that forgot the humanity of the people it was designed to serve. Because when a system makes someone feel invisible, it's not just a failure of law, it's a failure of soul. She'd seen it too many times. A teenage boy accused with no lawyer present, a mother deported over a typo, a veteran denied care because of a clerical error. They didn't make the news, they didn't have hashtags, but they were real, and they were dying in silence. What the Crockett versus Chen case revealed wasn't just corruption. It revealed how close the line truly was between a citizen and an outcast. It showed that in a nation built on laws, laws themselves could be weaponized against the people they were meant to protect. It taught America that democracy isn't just fragile, it's conditional, and the condition is vigilance. But the lesson didn't end in fear, it ended in resolve. Because for every closed door Jasmine had ever faced, she now kicked one open. For every time someone told her she didn't belong, she wrote policy that made sure the next girl who looked like her would belong. Not because the system allowed it, but because she demanded it. And yet, even in triumph, she never forgot the cost. In private moments, she would still find herself wondering, how many people didn't get the chance to stand up? How many were swallowed by systems without ever being named? The thought tormented her, but it also fueled her, because if her voice could carry even one name back from the void, if her spotlight could pull even one person out of the shadows, then the fight was worth every second. In one of her final interviews before Congress recessed that spring, a journalist asked her, "What's the one thing you want people to remember from all this?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "That silence," she said, "is never neutral." That line became the foundation of an entire school campaign, printed on walls, stamped into notebooks, repeated in assemblies. Silence is never neutral. It became a call not just to speak out, but to listen differently, to stop dismissing quiet suffering as the price of order. Because when someone says, "I don't feel real," we cannot afford to wait until the cameras arrive. The deeper humanitarian lesson then wasn't just about government. It was about culture, about how easy it is to believe that pain only matters when it's loud. But most pain isn't loud. It's buried. It's folded into late shifts at gas stations, into wrong names on court dockets, into the quiet refusal of access that feels too polite to fight. Jasmine's story was dramatic, but its power came from what it revealed about the undramatic stories, the ones that didn't end in a federal arrest or a law passed in record time, the ones that end in silence. She made a promise not just to change systems, but to remind America that its strength doesn't come from power. It comes from its memory, the ability to remember who we are when no one is watching, the ability to hold empathy even when it's inconvenient, the ability to say, "This is wrong," even when the paperwork is signed, even when the gavel falls. She taught us that a courtroom isn't sacred because of its architecture. It's sacred only if it protects the people who walk into it, and that no title, no robe, no bench should ever be above the truth. But most of all, Jasmine Crockett taught us that the most radical act in a world trained to forget is to remember. And now, because of her, America does. But what good is a lesson if it dies in the classroom? What's the point of truth if it's never turned into movement? Jasmine knew that her story, no matter how powerful, would mean nothing if people went back to sleep. And so she called them to rise. This wasn't just about one judge or one courtroom. This was about every citizen who's ever been silenced, erased, or mislabeled, and about every one of us who stood by, thinking justice was someone else's fight. Jasmine Crockett didn't ask for applause. She demanded accountability. On the Capitol steps, with the camera still rolling and the echoes of her final speech bouncing off of stone pillars, she pointed beyond the microphones to the people. "Don't wait for a courtroom to become your battlefield," she said. "Don't wait until your rights are on the line to care. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. And if we don't fight for each other, who will?" She didn't ask America to be perfect. She asked it to be present, to show up in city council meetings, to demand transparency in local courts, to vote not just for charisma, but for integrity, to read the fine print before handing over their consent. Her voice didn't shake. It cut through the noise with the precision of someone who knew what it was like to be dismissed. "Stand up before it's you," she warned. "Stand up before it's too late." She didn't want fans. She wanted fighters. Neighbors who would refuse to turn away, teachers who would name the injustice, students who would organize, journalists who would dig deeper, everyday people who would refuse to be ruled by convenience. Because democracy was never meant to be a spectator sport, and citizenship wasn't a status. It was a responsibility. Jasmine didn't walk out of that courtroom just to reclaim her name. She walked out so no one else would have to fight the same war alone. So if you're reading this, hearing this, feeling this, don't scroll past. Don't wait for permission. This is your country. This is your call. Answer it. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.